Shalom, and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of a Shabbat teaching with Rabbi Adam Kligfeld.
One of the aphorisms about rabbinic sermons and teachings is that rabbis really just give one sermon over and over again. I'm sort of curious to ask if you think I give one sermon over and over again, what's the title of the topic? But I don't think I want to know the answer to that question. But another aphorism or truism is that teachers of all sorts, and certainly interpreters of the tradition or people who attempt to interpret tradition, are sermonizing through the prism of their reality that given moment. Right? There's a reason why the commentaries from the era of the Crusades felt very, very differently about Esav and the descendants of Rome than those who were not living under persecution from the Christians. Right? And any time someone gives a drash or a teaching, it's simultaneously about the material, for sure. It's also about the material, right? Whether consciously or unconsciously. I've gone back, and because I have on my files pretty much every sermon I've ever given. And I've gone back to read through certain sermons in certain stages of my life. And since I know myself, I can smell the subtext, right? Even if it wasn't explicit. The sermons that I gave in the first 6 months of being a parent, those were the sermons of an exhausted, raw, young father, right? And it wasn't always present in what I was saying, but I could sense it in between the words. So this teaching is going to be about Parshat Vayigash, but it can't be decoupled from where I am right now, as many of you know, and is visible on my face in Shloshim, observing Shloshim for my mother, and once again in grief, and once again kind of searching around for anything to grasp onto to help me through, because it's hard. It's hard to bury a parent, and it's hard to bury your second parent in a short period of time. And it's hard to know which rope is the right one to hold on to. And it's hard to know which theology, which understanding of the world is the one that will be most helpful right now. My teacher, Rabbi Daniel Hartman, said the right theology for crisis is the one that works. It might be different for every person, but if you find some notion of God or some conception of the world that seems to work for you when you're in crisis, that's the proper one. But as always, we begin in the text itself, because the text is our starting point. It's also sometimes our ending point, but it's certainly our starting point. And I'm glad I actually put the verse on the sheet. I was debating whether or not I need to put in the verse on the sheet, but I said to myself, everyone's going to have the Chumash in front of them, but apparently not. So, look at the first verse of Parshat Vayigash. We'll break it down slowly. Vayigash elav Yehuda. Yehuda approached him. The root of Vayigash is Nun Gimel Shin. If you know a little bit about the way Hebrew roots operate, is that sometimes when the Nun is the first letter of the root, it falls out in certain forms. Like Vayipol is, and he fell, but the root is Nafal. So the root is Nagash. Nigash means to draw close. This is Everett Fox's translation on the left. When Yehuda came closer and said, and you know the scene, this is the resolution of the cliffhanger where Binyamin has been imprisoned. Yosef has the information the brothers do not, which is that he is related to them. And Yehuda is stepping forward to redress the wrongs of a generation, right? Redress the moments where they put their sibling in danger. Now he's putting himself in between his sibling in danger. Vayigash elav Yehuda. Yehuda approached him being whom he did not know was Yosef, but the viceroy, Vayomer, and he said, Bi Adoni. Bi is a weird word. It's sort of translated here as just a pleading. It's not that you translate the word "be" as "please," but when it's thrust into a statement like that, it's as if it's operating as a entreaty. Please, my Lord, Yidaber na avdecha. May your servant, which is me, right? Biblical dialogue often has when speaking to a person in authority, the person refers to himself or herself in the third person. So may your servant, meaning me, speak na. Na is another pleading word. So the verse is written in such a way that says there's a lot of pleas going on here, a lot of obsequiousness. Please let my servant say a word, davar, be'oznei adoni, in the ears of my Lord, and my Lord is you, right? Referring to him with proper authority. V'al yichar apecha be'avdecha. May your nostrils not flare, right? May you not be angry at your servant. Ki chamocha kifaro, because after all, you are as if Pharaoh. You wield all the power and the authority of Pharaoh. You're Caesar. We could say that anachronistically. You have the power of life and death in your hands. Please don't be angry at me. Okay? So just the human pathos of this scene is obvious, right? You have a guy who does not realize, Yehuda, how safe he actually is, because he doesn't know it's Yosef. They're hungry. They're weary from their travel. They're powerless. Their brother is in prison. They know that if they don't come home with their brother, the father who hasn't forgiven them for Yosef's loss is going to get angry at them again. But when you don't have power, you don't have power. All you have is pleading, right? What your two options when you're in a position like this is to puff yourself up and pretend like you have more power than you do, and maybe that'll be impressive, or to get smaller and be honest about the fact that you don't have the power. He chose the latter. The former hadn't worked so well for the brothers. Please, you're the one in charge. You're like Pharaoh. Please save me, or save my brother. Rashi on that verse, the classic early medieval commentator, like in a very Rashiistic way, says a lot by saying only a few words. He quotes the verse, Vayigash Elav, etc., and the end of the quotation of the verse, although those in my Rashi class know, it's not necessarily the case that when we have the quote from the verse upon which Rashi is commenting, that Rashi actually included that in his commentary. It may have been ex post facto. It may be a later editor trying to infer from the comment what words on the verse are being commented on. But the way it's brought down to us is that the quotation is both the approaching Vayigash Elav and the davar be'oznei adoni, that may a word enter into your ears. And Rashi says three words. Yikansu dvari be'oznecha. May my word, my davar, yikansu, enter, actually dvarai, words, may my words enter your ears. We have to assume that Rashi is not saying something obvious, otherwise he wouldn't have said it. What's the non-obvious thing that Rashi might be saying as a way of understanding what the verse means? What is Rashi adding by saying that what Yehuda is saying is, may my words penetrate your ears? Yes, Brian.
I mean, speak to you, but if I'm speaking to the king, that doesn't necessarily mean the king's listening. I'm gracious enough to have an audience with the king, but who am I?
Good. So it's as if Yehuda is asking for two things. I'm asking for the permission to speak. That's chutzpahdik on its own. But I'm asking for you to listen. I'm asking for you to actually pay some attention to me. Michael?
Perhaps he's also saying, he's thinking to himself, I know that I speak a different language than you. And he's asking that he be able to understand his words.
Interesting. So maybe what Rashi is saying is that the presence of the word oznei adoni, the ears of the Lord in the verse, is suggesting that Yehuda is nervous that even if he does speak, he'll be unintelligible. So it's as if he's asking for an interpreter. He's asking for the person in charge to evince a certain amount of patience and willingness to take it in, right? There's a difference. What's that great scene in the Fiddler on the Roof where Chava comes and she wants to say goodbye to Tevye, and I think Huddle, maybe it's Seidel, I think Huddle says, I forgot who says what to him. I think Chava says he won't listen to me, and Huddle says, but at least he will hear you, right? Those are two different things, right? Letting it in is different than just the auditory process of hearing something, and Yehuda is saying, I want you actually to listen, not just to hear. Cindy?
I'm thinking, so you come to have an audience, and you can say, let's say from me to you right now, or further, and you can speak more loudly, right? But I think it also means Yehuda came closer to him, like literally, like much closer, like a more intimate, closer, both to be heard, to kind of be listened to and heard, but also to potentially create a more intimate situation.
Lovely. Let me paraphrase for those on Zoom. What Cindy's offering is that maybe Rashi's interpretation on the relationship between the verb vayigash, to draw close, and then reference to the ears, is that Yehuda really drew close, almost as if he had the audacity to whisper in the viceroy's ear, right? So that there's creating a physical closeness that might lead to some kind of a relational closeness because the stakes are very high. Good. One more on this. Yeah, Bobby?
I'm looking at this actually from the perspective of the familial aspect, even though Yehuda doesn't know that Joseph is his brother. I look at Naz's family and my parents a lot as this example where we oftentimes are too comfortable communicating with our siblings or our parents or our immediate family. And in this regard, it's almost better sometimes to be formal and to be very respectful because the stakes are high and it's better to err on the sensitive side, even if we're so comfortable with the people we live with. And to me, that's really important on a day-to-day basis, whether you're talking to the pharaoh or the viceroy, you're talking to your spouse, or your parent, or your son, or your daughter, or your brother, or sister.
To maintain the formality, or are you saying to maintain?
To some extent. Not to the point where it's comical, but to the point where we're mindful of that we still need to be sensitive and respectful of one another because you never know where things could go sour.
And if that's the read, Bobby, then Rashi might be saying that despite the fact that I'm maintaining proper formal distance and structure, I really want you to hear me. I really want this to get in order to be heard. Yeah. Yes.
I don't know whether it's the same root, but when we use Knesset, and maybe it's that he's asking to be received as a member of the community as opposed to a stranger.
Good. So, your name? Michael, welcome. It is the same root, right? Beit Knesset does not mean house of prayer. It means house of incoming, house of welcome, house of gathering, right? Lekanes means to gather in. In USY, we called a Shabbaton a kinus because it was a gathering in of people. And so Rashi's saying maybe what Rashi's saying is I don't want just my words to be included. I want to be included in the community of people that you, Yosef, are listening to. Okay. All those interpretations and more are reading this verse as it looks like it ought to be read, which is it's all happening on this realm. These are two human beings who are related to each other, even though one of them doesn't know. And what's going on here is a human drama. And we can learn a lot from this drama in terms of how to speak to someone in hard situations. Okay, great. There are interpretations of this verse that go way beyond that. And in order to make sense of it, you have to understand that when the Hasidic tradition in the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries, and even till today, took hold of the Kabbalistic tradition, which had been in development for 1,000 years, they saw archetypes everywhere, and they saw in nearly every significant biblical character some other image or form or representation that allowed them to see every scene as not just happening on this realm, but on that realm, or at least in between these two realms. Even if you have not studied the Kabbalah formally, most of you at some point have seen that kind of tree of the Sfirot, the structure, that is the Kabbalist attempt to understand, and this is extremely dense and very complicated, and I promise you I'm not being falsely humble and say I don't understand all of it myself, even a little bit, but something like there is an array of divine emanations, character traits, representation of the world. It's a hierarchy from the most supernal and high to the one that's most touching our realm, and that also kind of gets grafted onto the human condition, that each of us being made in the image of the divine, we also have an opportunity to climb that ladder inside our own character. And there's also a place where they meet, right? So the place that they meet At the bottom of that tree, if you can picture it, and each of these places has several different names, which makes it more wonderful and complicated to study, is sometimes called Shekhinah. Shekhinah, which is what we often translate as the feminine presence of the divine, the soft, feminine, almost we can touch it, part of the divine. That rung in the Kabbalah is also referred to as Knesset Yisrael, the gathering of Israel, because it's the place where the portal is most open, where the aperture is just wide enough that we human beings, we Israel, can look up and almost see God coming down, and there's union there, there's ecstasy there, there's marriage there, there's Shabbat there. Okay, so the bottom of that rung is both God's lowest divine presence and our highest, the aspiration of our highest. And to make things more wonderful and complicated, different biblical characters are identified with different places on that rung. And the lowest character one, Knesset Yisrael, also known as Shekhinah, is identified with Yehuda, Yehuda from which we get the word Yehudi or Jew, which means the Jew. Yehuda is at the bottom of that rung. And the top of that rung, if we graph biblical characters onto that Kabbalistic rung, I did this exercise in the meditation on Friday. Who would you guess which biblical character would be at the very, 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 very top of that? Moshe. You would think it would be Moshe. It isn't. You might think it would be Abraham. It isn't. You might think it would be? It's Yosef. Why it's Yosef would take many years of class to figure it out. But just believe me that when the Kabbalists saw Yosef, they saw the guy in the scene, and they saw the Kadosh Baruch Hu. Yosef representing the holiest, highest experience of God. Which means that to a Kabbalist and to a Chassid, this scene is not just about Judah talking to Joseph. It's about the Jewish people talking to God. Because Judah is the Jewish people, and Yosef is God on some level. Now, with that in mind, look at source 4. This is the Kedushat Levi, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev, one of the great Hasidic masters. He quotes the verse, Vayigash elav Yehuda, bottom of page 1. This is just the verse. And Yehuda approached him, Vayomer bi Adoni, and he said, please, my Lord, Yidaber nav dachav davar be'oznei Adoni. May your servant say some words in the ears of my Lord. Al yichar apcha be'avdecha. Don't get mad at your servant. Ki chamocha kefaro, because you're like Pharaoh. This is what the Berdichever, filtering the Kabbalah, says. Ve'han nireh. It seems to me. Dehine amru chachamenu zal. That which our sages of blessed memory said, and you have the citation from the Talmud tractate Moed Katan, page 16b, Tzadik Moshel Beyirat Elohim. 4 words, not so hard to know what each word means, very hard to know the full syntax of the phrase. Tzadik means righteous. Moshel means rule, like memshala, government is ruler. Beyirat Elohim, with, through, or via the fear of God. Okay. If you extract those 4 words on their own, the righteous one rules through the fear of God. What could that possibly mean? Say that again? Okay, so maybe if since the righteous person has earned God's favor, the righteous person, the tzaddik, has a certain power in the world that has been accessed through living with fear of God. Turn back a second to source 3. This is, in the Talmud, a intentional reformatting of 2 verses in the 2nd book of Samuel, and the speaker here is King David. It's one of the last speeches he gives in the Bible. And he says in verse 3, source 3, verse 3, Amar Elohei Yisrael, Li, the God of Israel said to me, Diber Tzur Yisrael, or maybe it's Li Diber Tzur Yisrael, that the rock of Israel said Li. Here the Li probably means about me, not to me. And here's our phrase, but it means different in the context of the verse than the way that the Talmud quotes it. It probably means, Moshel ba'adam tzadik. If you rule over people, tzadik, justly, meaning tzadik isn't the subject of the verb, of the verb. Here in the verse, it's probably if you rule people in a just way, Moshel yirat Elohim. If you rule with the fear of God, then, verse 4, and this is a little bit hard because verse 4 begins with an u, a vav, an and the syntax suggests that there shouldn't be an and there, but something like, subsequent to that, Ka'or boker yizrach hashemesh. That kind of ruling, when you rule like a righteous person, when you rule with the fear of God, is like the blazing sunlight in the morning. Boker lo avot, a morning without clouds. Minoga mimatar, whether it's light and splendor or rain. Deshe ma'aretz, it brings forth grass on the earth. In the context of the verse, King David is saying, probably reflecting on his own rule and maybe transmitting something to his son, rule justly. Be a king compassionately. Right? Wield authority over your subject with kindness, and the earth will produce. That is not how the Talmud uses the verse. Go back to page 2, and it's not how the Berditchever is quoting it. He's quoting it as a phrase by itself, Tzadik Moshel Biyirat Elohim, kind of the way we talked about it before, that a righteous person rules, develops authority through the fear of God, and he turns it into kind of a little of a dialogue. Me Moshel Bi, as if God was saying, who could possibly have power over me? Tzaddik, a righteous person. How could a righteous person have power over God? He continues, Kshe HaKadosh Baruch Hu gozer gzera. When the Holy One issues a harsh decree, tzaddikim mivatlim. Righteous people have the power to nullify it. If this sounds like high holiday liturgy a little bit, Unatana Tokef, it's related to that. The Berditchever Rebbe is making the argument that when God issues a harsh decree, if you're a tzaddik, you can nullify it. How? He hasn't told us yet. Is this metaphysics? Does a tzaddik person have the power to engage in a ritual and to actually reverse the diagnosis? Change the course of events? I don't think so. He's speaking on a spiritual level, not on a metaphysical level. V'natan Hashem yitbarach koach, and God, the Holy One, gives strength, ugvura, and might, latzadikim, to the righteous ones, sheyuchlu levatel, that they will be able to nullify how? Bitfilatam, in their prayers, kol gzerot ra'ot, all evil decrees. He could be saying two things. I think he's saying only one of those two things. He could be saying that prayer is magic. He could be saying that the Misha Berach should work if you're a righteous person. He could be saying that if you ask God for healing or for a good season or for the return of Israel to the land, that if you're a righteous person, God will listen. I don't think he's saying that. I think he's saying that when you have and you live a life of prayer, and you're a tzaddik, and you believe it, and you dive into it, the harshness of the world's decrees are less harsh. You have the power to nullify or soften the tremendous pain that the world throws upon you if you are a person who prays, and if you're a person who prays as a righteous person. V'nikreim, and then they would be called, kivyachol, as it were, Moshel Bit Tzaddik, one who is a righteous person and therefore can actually have some control over God. Second paragraph. Zen yiret pirush pasuk. This seems to be the interpretation of the following verse. Kinei hamlachim noadu avru yachdav. This is from Psalm 48. Anybody know where in liturgy we hit these words? Once a week we say these words. Michael, you should know. Psalm for Monday. Okay, it's in Psalm for Monday. Ki hinei hamlachim, that behold, the kings, no adu, kind of took counsel from one another, avru yachdav, something like they engaged with one another. And this is now going to go back to what I said before about the Berditchever Rebbe understanding the Kabbalah the way he described it. Ze Yehuda v'Yosef, that verse about the kings kind of confronting one another, that references Yudah and Yosef, and this is where we get to our verse. Yosef nikra hakadosh baruch hu. I know that sounds crazy if you don't know Kabbalah. Joseph is called the Holy One. How could that be? He is. Joseph is thought to live at the top of that structure. The Yehuda nikra, and Judah is called Knesset Yisrael, the congregation of Israel, the bottom rung of the Sfirah, Shechina. V'zeh perush pasuk. This is the interpretation of the verse. Vayigash elav Yehuda. That don't just read it as Judah, a man, came close to Joseph, a man, but rather read it as Judah representing Israel, Knesset Yisrael, Nigashim, got close to. What does it mean to get close to in spiritual language? To pray. Lahakadosh Baruch Hu. There was a union that took place because of prayer. Vayomer, and he said, remember that phrase, Bi Adoni, which I said before is hard to translate because Bi doesn't really turn into something. Bi also means the preposition ba, which means in or upon, and me. So Bi can mean on me or in me. And he said, Bi Adoni. Judah, representing the Jewish people who know how to pray, said to Joseph, who represents God, Bi Adoni. Within me is Adonut. Within me is lordship. Within me is power. I have some power over you, God. No matter what you throw at me, I have some power over you. Kiviyachol, as it were, Bi ha'adanut v'memshalah. You think you, God, can just throw a decree upon me and I take it as is? I've got some adon. I have some rulership or authority in me. Demi moshelbi, as if God was recognizing and saying, who possibly rules over me? Tzadikim, righteous people. Betfilatam, in their prayer. Mivatlin kol gzerot kashot. Can cancel or soften all of the harsh decrees. Umamshichim liYisrael, and can continue on Israel's behalf. Shefa tov ubrachot. Continue the flow. How do you experience any light or any warmth or any love or any hope or any optimism when it seems that the world has thrown terrible decrees upon you? The Berditchev Rabbi would say, pray. When you pray, the flow continues. When you stop praying, it obstructs it. When you stop praying, you are at the mercy of the situations you are in. When you are a person of prayer, not because prayer is magic, but when you're a person of prayer, the spiritual pilot light is on, and something about the decree that has been placed in front of you is manageable. It cannot be undone. You can sort of see where I'm going with this. I cannot undo what happened in my life 17 days ago. I wish I could. I'm still shocked by it. I cannot undo it. But when the tradition tells a mourner to pray, the tradition has some smarts. When the tradition tells the mourner to come be in community and say the same words that Jews have been saying for thousands of years, and to put something on the mourner's lips that might penetrate his or her heart, there is a bitul, there's a nullification or a softening or a redirecting or a mustering through the harshness that I and everyone in my family feels has been thrust upon us. Look at the last paragraph. V'zehu, and this is how we can understand that last phrase from the verse, Yidaber na'avdecha davar bo'znei Adoni el yichar b'cha bi'avdecha, that may I say a few words in your ears and don't be angry at me, shehat tzadikim b'tfilatam, that righteous people in their prayers, lahaborei baruch hu, to the Holy Blessed One, mehapchim, they reverse, mimidat hadin, the harsh judgment aspect of God, lemidat rachamim, the aspect of God which is merciful. Shalo yehe chas v'shalom shum charon af. When I, as a rabbi, ask people to do the following thing, and I, as a mourner, was asked to do it, to rip my clothing and to bless God as Dayan Hamet, the true judge, all of that is being done so that I, in my experience of the world and my experience of those moments, can start tiptoeing on the pathway from the judge to from the one who judges to the one who holds, from the one who decreed, if that's how this happened, to the one who comforts. And I do it through prayer. And I'm certain, my friends, that if I tried to do this healing without prayer, I'd be lost. I'd be blind. Relatively recently, I went to the home of a member of the community whom I knew was sick. I don't know how sick. The person wanted to speak with me and sat down in this person's kitchen, and they told me about a horrific diagnosis that they are confronting and may very well take this person's life potentially very quickly. It was very, very sad. The person had some logistical questions for me about burial plots, about the advantages or disadvantages of being buried close to where you live versus close to where your children are. Had some questions for me about the Jewish ethics surrounding DNRs, and had to start thinking about what he or she, I'll anonymize it, would have in the chart so that the decisions that will be made on this person's behalf will be informed by the highest level of Jewish values. And we talked it out, and we kind of got somewhere in the conversation, and it was almost time to leave. I'd been there an hour. And there was really only one thing to do left. We prayed. And I took this person's hand, and the person's spouse came over and added their hand, and we closed our eyes. And I said, I don't know how prayer works. I don't know if the words said in this kitchen penetrate the cosmos. But I know that prayer works. I know that prayer changes the ether in the room. I know that prayer has the ability to strengthen a heart. And we prayed, and we cried, and the decree that this person is facing is still present. I can't do anything about that. But there is something palpable and real and softening about that spiritual encounter that makes the darkness of whatever this family is facing a tiny bit more possible to confront. So I share with all of you that we're gathering here the Shabbat for prayer. That's why we come to shul. But we don't always come to shul for prayer. We say we do. We come to shul for cholent. No problem with that. There's no cholent today. I'm so sorry. We couldn't get the cholent makers in this week. There's hummus. There's no cholent. We come to shul to renew bonds of friendship. That's real and important too. We come to shul to help make a minyan. That's a mitzvah. I want to invite all of us occasionally to come to shul to pray. And not just when you're confronting loss, and not just when you're obligated to because that's what the tradition says, and not just because you're facing a particularly dark time, but because I think that the Berditchever Rebbe is right. That if you're a righteous person, and I think you all have righteousness in you, and you open your mouth and your heart for tefillah that has power in the world, it may not be able to change the facts of reality, but it can certainly change the way in which you, the person, you, the soul, absorb, react to, march through, and maybe on some spiritual level transcend those facts. So I wish you a Shabbat Shalom. And in the prayer we're about to do, I wish you the ability to pray.
You've been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast website or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information on Temple Beth Am, Los Angeles, please visit www.tbala.org.